There's a peculiar silence that follows betrayal, not the silence of peace, but the silence of something missing, something ripped away from the very center of your being. It is not just the absence of loyalty that hurts the most. It is the presence of deception where trust once lived. When someone you love, someone you stood for, someone you would have defended in the darkest of hours, turns on you, not with swords, but with silence, lies, and disregard, what remains is a gaping wound where meaning used to reside. And here's the terrifying part. They chose it. They chose betrayal over loyalty, not by accident, not in ignorance, but in full awareness of what they were doing. They weighed the loyalty you offered them, the commitment, the trust, the moments you stayed when no one else would, and they discarded it like something cheap, replaceable, forgettable. That choice wasn't a mistake. It was a revelation of character. Have you ever considered what it costs a person to betray someone who was loyal to them? Because it does cost them something deep, not immediately and certainly not publicly, but silently, slowly, inevitably. There's a strange justice in the architecture of life, a structure built not by laws alone, but by something older, more primal. When you break trust, when you abandon those who stood by you, when you spit on loyalty and embrace betrayal, the universe takes note. It doesn't forget. You can fake smiles, post happy pictures, surround yourself with distractions and noise, but you can't outrun the void that betrayal. Betrayal doesn't just destroy relationships, it hollows out the soul of the betrayer. It feeds them false strength and momentary power, but only for a while. Then the echo begins, that long, hollow echo that follows them into empty nights, into shallow conversations, into every achievement that feels strangely dull. That is the consequence of choosing betrayal over loyalty. Peace walks away, and in its place comes a companion they never expected, emptiness. But let's turn the lens back to you for a moment. You gave what was pure. You stood in the gap. You stayed when you had every reason to leave. You offered them a version of yourself that was honest, raw, loyal. And they mistook your strength for weakness. They confused your kindness for naivety. They played their game thinking you wouldn't wake up. But here you are, awake. Not broken, not bitter, but aware. And with that awareness comes something they never anticipated. Your healing, your transformation, your rise. But as you rise, they fall. Not always dramatically, but inevitably. Because no one gets away with planting seeds of betrayal without reaping a harvest of regret. So ask yourself this. Why does their life now feel so heavy, so chaotic, so empty? Why are they constantly chasing people, chasing pleasure, chasing peace, yet never finding any of it? Because they traded something eternal for something temporary. They traded loyalty for gain, and now what they gave is coming back. Twice as hard, twice as cold, twice as painful, because that's how life rebalances the scales. You don't need revenge. You don't even need justice in the way you once craved it. Because life has its own method. It watches, it waits, and then it returns the energy, compounded. And now let's go deeper into that truth. Let's break it down. They ignored your pain. Now life ignores their pleas. There was a time when your pain was not just visible, it was loud. Not through words necessarily, but in the way your voice trembled when you spoke, in the way your eyes welled up, but you blinked it back again and again, hoping that someone, just one person, would notice, hoping that the people you held closest, the ones you trusted with your most vulnerable self, would care enough to ask, "Are you okay?" But they didn't. They looked right at you and saw everything, yet chose to do nothing. You tried to be strong, not because you wanted to be, but because you had no other choice. When the ones you believed would hold your hand in the storm instead turned their backs, you were left standing in the rain alone. That kind of abandonment doesn't just sting, it alters your very sense of reality. You begin to wonder if you matter at all, if the love you gave, the loyalty you showed, the sacrifices you made meant anything. But what they didn't realize is that in those moments of silence, when they turned away from your pain, when they dismissed your cries, They were writing the script for their own suffering, because pain that is ignored doesn't just disappear, it multiplies. And now that same silence they offered you is echoing back to them. But this time it's their cries that go unanswered. They reach out now, but to whom? The same people they prioritized over you? The ones who clapped while they betrayed you? Those people are gone now, aren't they? Loyalty built on disloyalty collapses. The relationships they formed while destroying you were doomed before they began. Now when they hurt, no one listens. Now when they plead for understanding, they're met with the same emptiness they once forced you to live in. There is a devastating irony in the justice of life. They once saw your pain and shrugged. Now they are desperate for someone, anyone, to see theirs. But no one comes. Their messages are left on read. Their stories are ignored. Their calls go unanswered. The world, once so full of noise and distraction, suddenly feels suffocating in its quietness. And that silence, that's the sound of karma doing its work. They thought ignoring you made them powerful. They thought being indifferent to your suffering made them untouchable. But life has a memory longer than theirs. It remembers the nights you cried, the moments you begged God to take the pain away, the days you pretended to smile when your heart was bleeding. Life saw it all. And now that same life is responding not with rage, but with mirrored silence. This isn't revenge, it's not payback, it's balance. And as they sit in their loneliness, screaming inside for someone to care, to understand, to save them, the only answer they hear is the very silence they gave you. The silence they once used as a weapon has now become their prison. They spread lies, now truth undermines their reputation. They didn't just walk away, they rewrote the story. And not just any story, your story. They twisted the narrative, painted you as the villain in the play you bled to keep alive. The lies weren't accidental. They were calculated, cold, and deliberate, crafted to destroy your character, to poison the perception others had of you, all while they stood back, pretending to be innocent. They whispered behind your back, smiled in your face, and shattered your name in places you couldn't even reach. And what hurt the most wasn't just the betrayal itself. It was how easily people believed them, how your silence, your dignity, your refusal to retaliate was mistaken for guilt. They played the victim while you carried the weight of every false accusation in quiet agony. You began to question your own worth, wondered if your truth even mattered anymore. The room felt colder. The eyes of people who once admired you turned suspicious, confused, distant. And the worst part? You had no proof, no stage, no spotlight to expose what was happening in the shadows. You were trapped in a story that wasn't yours, watching your name, your value, your identity be smeared by someone who once claimed to love you. But lies, no matter how carefully crafted, decay over time. They collapse under their own weight. And now, the truth is waking up. It's slow, but it's coming. The same mouth that lied about you is now trembling to maintain the mask. The same hands that forged deceit are now struggling to hold the crumbling walls of their reputation. Because here's what they never understood. Character is not built on manipulation. You cannot build a house on slander and expect it to stand when the storm comes. And the storm? It's here. People are starting to see the inconsistencies in their words, the cracks in their stories, the bitterness that bleeds through their smiles. What once looked like confidence now reeks of guilt. And their reputation? It's no longer untouchable. It's unraveling. The friends who once rallied behind their lies are starting to keep their distance. The ones they used to influence are now second-guessing everything they were told. Slowly but surely, the truth is eroding the walls they built on falsehoods, and the weight of maintaining those lies is crushing them. You, on the other hand, held your silence. You didn't retaliate, not because you couldn't, but because your integrity was never up for sale. You chose to heal in silence. You chose to rise rather than retaliate. And now, your truth is surfacing, not through vengeance, but through quiet strength. Every lie they spread is now a shadow following them, a reminder of the character they tried to destroy but couldn't. And as they desperately try to rebuild their image, they're haunted by the truth they buried, because what's buried doesn't die. it waits. They thought they won when others believed their lies, but what they never anticipated was this: that truth has a voice of its own, and when it speaks, it roars. They chose others over you. Now no one truly chooses them. There was a moment when they had you fully. Your heart, your attention, your loyalty was theirs. Not because they demanded it, but because you offered it freely. You stood by them when they had nothing, encouraged them when they doubted themselves, defended them when no one else would. You chose them over and over again, even when they didn't deserve it. And in return, they left you for someone else. Not necessarily a romantic interest. It could have been friends, family, attention, status. Whatever the case, they made it clear you were replaceable. They didn't say it outright, but their actions screamed it. They stopped showing up for you. They became distant, cold, distracted. And when you asked what was wrong, they told you it was all in your head. But deep down, you knew. You could feel the shift. The way their energy no longer reached you. The way your presence no longer excited them. You watched as they prioritized people who only wanted them for convenience, for gain, for momentary pleasure, people who had never invested half as much as you had, and still they handed your place to strangers like it meant nothing. You watched them build new bonds, post new smiles, celebrate new alliances. They didn't hesitate. They didn't grieve the space you once filled. It was as if everything you gave them, your time, your love, your soul, was forgettable, and it shattered you. Because being replaced isn't just about loss. It's about the realization that someone saw your value and still walked away. But here's the truth that time has slowly revealed. The people they chose over you, they never truly chose them either. They were temporary, surface level, conditional. They celebrated with them, laughed with them, maybe even flaunted them. But deep within, those relationships lacked depth. Why? Because no one they replaced you with could ever offer what you gave so selflessly. Now they're surrounded by people, but they feel alone, surrounded by noise, but craving the quiet peace you brought into their life. You see, being chosen isn't about popularity, it's about authenticity. It's about knowing someone is there not for what you offer, but for who you are. And once they threw that away, they unknowingly severed the one bond that was real. Now when they call, no one answers. When they fall, no one catches them. The ones they thought would choose them in return are leaving them on read, flaking out, walking away when things get hard, and the panic is setting in. They gave up someone who would have gone to war for them, and now they can't even find someone to stand beside them in silence. The truth is, they never found a replacement. They found a distraction. And when the excitement faded, when the conversations turned shallow, when the support they took for granted was nowhere to be found, they finally felt it, the emptiness of being surrounded by many, but truly chosen by none. They took without gratitude, now everything they gained feels empty. They were quick to take everything you offered. Your help, your time, your loyalty, your emotional labor. They absorbed it like it was their right, without ever stopping to say thank you, without recognizing that you weren't obligated to give any of it. They mistook your giving nature for obligation. They convinced themselves that you would always be there, always available, always willing to clean up their mess or hold their broken pieces together. Gratitude never crossed their mind. Not once did they pause to acknowledge the weight you carried for them, the sacrifices you made behind the scenes, the emotional bruises you endured just to keep them from falling apart. You gave and gave even when you were empty. You encouraged them when you needed encouragement yourself. You chose them even when you were the one needing to be chosen. And through it all, they kept taking, as if your love was a resource that would never run dry. But what they never realized is that receiving without gratitude creates a void. A person can only consume without appreciation for so long before everything starts tasting bitter. And now, even though they may appear to have everything, they feel nothing. The achievements, the friends, the comfort they once sought, none of it fills them. Because they've built their life on borrowed energy. Energy you poured into them when they were nothing, and they returned it with silence. Now they chase meaning in all the wrong places. They get the praise they wanted, but it doesn't fulfill them. They receive support from others, but it lacks the sincerity you once brought. They move through life ticking off accomplishments, but every celebration feels hollow. Because gratitude isn't about saying thank you. It's about seeing the person who stood beside you in your darkest hour and acknowledging the light they brought when you had none. Their soul is starving, not for success, but for meaning. And that meaning was embedded in the way you loved them without keeping score. The kind of love they'll never find again because they didn't just take it, they drained it. They emptied your well and walked away before ever realizing what they had drawn from. Now everything they gain feels weightless. Achievements come with no joy, relationships feel forced, conversations lack depth. They keep acquiring, but never feeling full, because nothing fills a soul that was once nurtured by something real and then abandoned it. The universe doesn't forget the hearts we drain without gratitude, and now it's giving them what they thought they wanted with the bitter taste of knowing it means absolutely nothing without the one person who once gave it all with no conditions. They mocked your kindness. They called you weak for showing compassion, naive for forgiving, foolish for being the one who still cared. You weren't cold enough for them, you weren't calculating, you didn't play games, and because of that, they saw you as someone easy to manipulate, someone disposable. You were the person who said it's okay even when it wasn't. You gave second chances when the first was barely acknowledged. And instead of appreciating the grace you extended, they mocked it. They mocked you. They told people you were too emotional, that you were too intense, that you cared too much. They spun your empathy into something embarrassing, something to be looked down upon. And for a while, you started to believe them. You began to question the very core of who you are. You wondered if maybe being kind really was a weakness. Maybe the world doesn't reward people who love too hard. Maybe you were the problem. But the truth was never that you were too kind, it's that they were too broken to receive it. You offered them something pure, something rare, something that didn't ask for anything in return, but was willing to give everything. That kind of love terrifies people who only know how to take. That kind of softness threatens those who hide behind walls of sarcasm, distance, and cruelty. So rather than receive your kindness and be transformed by it, they laughed. It was easier for them to mock what they couldn't understand than to admit how much they needed it. And now, that laughter has turned into echoes in empty rooms, because cruelty always circles back. You were mocked for having a heart. Now they're haunted by their own emptiness. They tried to find people who would love them like you did, but without the effort, without the honesty, and it's not working. The new people they surround themselves with don't care the way you cared. The words feel shallow. The gestures feel forced. No one is offering what you once gave freely, and it's starting to eat away at them. They remember your kindness now, not as a joke, not as a weakness, but as a lifeline they let go of far too soon. You see, people think they can walk away from goodness without consequence, that they can abuse the generous and discard the loyal and never face the weight of what they've done. But life has its way of showing them what they lost, not by destroying them in one blow, but by making them live in the absence of what they once took for granted. Now they try to be happy, but their joy feels artificial. Now they try to form bonds, but something's always missing. They think back to the moments you offered your heart, your time, your help, and they realize no one has ever stepped in for them the way you did. Their cruelty bought them short-term power, yes. They may have won the argument, the attention, the temporary advantage. But in the long run, what did they gain? Loneliness. Because no one trusts a heartless person. No one stays close to someone who ridicules the very thing that makes us human. They may pretend to be strong, they may still walk around with that arrogant smile, that dismissive attitude, but at night, in the silence, when the show ends and the crowd disappears, they feel it. The cold, the weight of what they became, and worst of all, they remember. They remember the softness in your voice when you forgave them, the way your eyes never looked down on them, the way you stayed calm even when they were cruel, Those memories used to be sources of power for them, proof that they had you. But now those same memories haunt them because they realize they had the one person who saw their worst and still offered their best, and they destroyed that. Now, their cruelty sits beside them like a shadow, not loud, not dramatic, just constant. Because when you laugh at love, you don't just lose the person, you lose the ability to recognize real love when it finally returns. And for them, that's the most haunting part of all. They left you in darkness. Now they can't find their way in the light. There was a time you were drowning, but they didn't notice. Or maybe they did and walked away anyway. When everything was falling apart inside you, when your heart was fractured, when you were silently screaming for help, they chose to look the other way. They saw the storm surrounding you, and instead of offering shelter, they stepped aside and let it consume you. Worse still, some of them watched it happen with indifference, and some with quiet satisfaction, because your suffering didn't inconvenience their comfort. They could have stayed. They could have spoken a word of encouragement. They could have chosen presence over absence, loyalty over apathy. But they didn't. They left, and their leaving wasn't just a physical absence, it was emotional abandonment. The kind that makes you question your worth, your importance, your place in their life. You found yourself wondering, was I ever valuable to them at all? In those moments of darkness when you had nothing and no one, you learned the cruelest truth of all. Not everyone who claims to love you will choose you when it matters most. You discovered how it feels to be invisible to people you would have walked through fire for. The betrayal of abandonment, especially from those you trusted, leaves a scar, not visible to the world, but it aches in quiet moments, in midnight silences, in memories you wish you could forget. But despite all of that, you didn't stay in that darkness. You learned how to crawl before you could walk again. You stitched your own wounds while pretending you weren't bleeding. You became your own light, your own support system, your own guide out of the pit they left you in. And that's what they never expected. They thought walking away would break you. They assumed you would stay in that low place, paralyzed by their absence. But you didn't. You rose, slowly, quietly, powerfully. And while you were finding your footing, something shifted on their side of the story. See, when people walk away from someone in their darkest hour, they don't walk into clarity. They walk into confusion. They lose their inner compass, not all at once, but gradually. At first, it looks like success. They seem happy, surrounded by people, chasing new dreams. But soon enough, they begin to stumble, not because someone is punishing them, but because they abandoned the very person who once grounded them. They're in the light now. Everything seems perfect, but they're lost because the light reveals what the dark conceals. And what it's revealing now is that without your presence, without your emotional depth, without the unwavering support you offered, they don't know who they are anymore. They keep searching for meaning, for connection, for something that feels real, but nothing satisfies, nothing lasts. Every celebration feels short-lived, every friendship feels hollow, every accomplishment feels undeserved. They're surrounded by clarity but plagued by confusion because the light has become overwhelming. Too many options, too many voices, too many masks, and not one of them feels true. When they abandoned you, they also abandoned a piece of themselves. The part that knew how to love deeply, how to stand firm, how to show up when it mattered, and now that part is gone. So they wander. They can't find what you once offered, not because it no longer exists, but because they lost the ability to recognize it. In the darkness, you needed someone and they walked. Now in the light, they need someone, and no one is reaching for them. They took your presence for granted, never realizing you were the one holding the emotional thread that kept their chaos in check. You were their lighthouse, and they turned away. And now they're sailing still, but without a map, without an anchor, without direction. Their regret may not show on their face. They might still appear proud, put together, confident, but inside, they're unraveling, because no matter how bright the outside world looks, if you're lost inside your own soul, no light can guide you. And now The people who once left you to navigate your darkness alone are discovering that their biggest punishment isn't your revenge, it's their inability to find peace even in the light they thought they wanted so badly. They thought they'd won. Now life is quietly taking everything back. They walked away from the wreckage they caused with a smirk, believing they had won. They had broken you. They had shattered your peace, dismantled your trust, and walked off with pieces of your soul like trophies of a victory they never earned. They mistook your silence for defeat. They saw your withdrawal as surrender. They believed that because they left you in pain and moved on with ease, the story had ended in their favor. They flaunted their newfound joy, their new connections, their temporary highs. They posted smiles that screamed triumph, as if to say, "Look, I'm doing just fine without you." They dressed their betrayal in justification, excusing their disloyalty with half-truths and lies that made them feel better about what they'd done. And people clapped, people praised them. People believed the version of the story where they came out looking like the survivor, the strong one, the hero. And you were left with the silence of being misunderstood, unseen, erased. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't have imagined, is that life doesn't close its books when people walk away. Life keeps score. Not in anger, not in haste, but in precision. And life waits, not for revenge, but for balance. And now, one by one, what they gained through betrayal is slipping through their fingers. Not dramatically, not loudly, quietly, softly, subtly, but undeniably. The attention they once basked in is fading. The people they thought would stay forever are growing distant. The happiness they tried to force into their life feels forced, fleeting, artificial. Because no amount of external noise can drown out the internal consequences of doing wrong by someone who was true. Life has a way of stripping things back down to the truth. It begins with small cracks, opportunities drying up, relationships becoming strained, moments of emptiness that seem to come out of nowhere. It escalates slowly, almost imperceptibly, but as they look around, they begin to notice a pattern. Nothing feels as fulfilling as they thought it would. The applause is quieter, the highs don't last, the victories feel tainted. And underneath it all, there's a whisper, one they tried to ignore. You didn't win, you just delayed the cost. The illusion of success is a powerful drug, and for a time it can numb the conscience, blur the memory, silence the guilt. But illusions don't last. Reality always returns, and when it does, it demands full payment. Not for the choices that were easy to make, but for the pain those choices inflicted on others, for the trust broken, for the loyalty betrayed, for the hearts wounded. They're beginning to feel it now, not in grand tragedies, but in the quiet unraveling of what they thought they had secured. Because betrayal never builds a strong foundation. It's built on sand, on selfishness, on shortcuts. And when the winds of life begin to blow, those foundations crumble. They thought they had won. They thought they had moved on. But what they didn't realize is that everything gained by destroying someone else's peace eventually turns to dust. Not because you curse them, but because truth and justice are woven into the fabric of existence, and the energy they put out, the lies, the manipulation, the coldness, the arrogance, it's all coming back. Doubled, weighted, unavoidable. Meanwhile, you're still standing, maybe quietly, maybe scarred, maybe changed, but still here, still growing. And the irony of it all, you were the one they thought was weak, that you didn't need to pretend. You didn't need to destroy to feel powerful. You faced your pain. You rebuilt in silence. And now, as life quietly takes back everything they once boasted about, the truth is being revealed, not in words, but in outcomes. Because real strength doesn't need an audience, and karma doesn't need to shout. So here we are, at the edge of the storm, looking back at all that has unraveled. The betrayal, the silence, the mockery, the abandonment. It was never the end of your story. It was the beginning of a painful awakening. You were never weak for loving deeply. You were never foolish for choosing loyalty. You were not wrong for standing by people who walked away when the fire got too hot. What you gave came from a place of depth, of honor, of truth. And those things are never wasted. But those who betrayed you, they made a deal with a force they didn't understand. They traded something sacred for something temporary. They thought they could rewrite the story with lies, discard the loyalty without consequence, and walk away as if truth doesn't echo. But truth does echo. It doesn't always come back with thunder, but it always comes back. And now, the silence they once weaponized has turned into their cage. The victories they flaunted have grown cold. The peace they thought they'd find in your absence has turned to chaos in their soul. And you're rising. You're not who you were before. You're wiser now, sharper, quieter, but louder in presence than ever before. The pain didn't destroy you. It refined you. It carved out the noise, exposed the lies, and revealed who was real. And now that you've seen the truth, you can never unsee it. You don't need to fight anymore. You don't need to prove your worth. Life has already begun doing that for you. What they gave has returned twice as hard, and what you gave, loyalty, love, truth, has planted seeds of restoration that are finally beginning to bloom. Let them watch. Let them wonder why peace follows you now. Why you're not bitter, why you're still standing while they slowly unravel. Because the real victory was never about proving them wrong. It was about becoming the version of yourself they were never worthy of witnessing. Walk forward now, not with vengeance, but with power. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. Not to hurt them, but to heal yourself. Because in the end, justice doesn't always come in noise. Sometimes justice comes in silence. And in that silence you win.